Welcome to the first video in a new series. In this video, we are going to kickstart our study of advanced orchestration techniques by learning the 3 pillars of great orchestration. We'll learn how separation, focus, and balance are necessary to give your music a clean and polished sound, while also figuring out specific strategies to make sure that your music is always supported by these 3 pillars. So with that, let's get started. The first and often most overlooked of these 3 pillars is separation. Now, separation is just the simple idea that every layer of your sketch should sound like its own distinct layer. In other words, your audience should be able to tell the difference between your foreground and your background material. The foreground material is just whatever part of your music you want your audience to pay the most attention to. This is typically the melody, but can honestly be any layer of your music that you want it to be. The material in your foreground can even shift over the course of your music if you'd like it to. In fact, this is actually encouraged. All other material in your music is called the background material, and it exists to provide context and support to your foreground. This material is still important, but shouldn't be so prominent that the audience can't or doesn't notice the foreground. One of the worst offenses of many beginning orchestrators is to find themselves accidentally mixing up their foreground material with the background material, and ending up with an arrangement that has no chance of keeping the two separate. This results in a muddy and disorganized mess that won't really capture the audience's attention. For example, let's listen to this short musical idea that I've written. Not exactly a winner, so how can I go about improving it? As a composer, you have 4 primary strategies at your disposal to help create distinction between the different layers of your music: pitch, articulation, rhythm, and tone color. Each of these strategies is pretty self-explanatory. Separating layers by pitch means using different pitch ranges for each layer to help them sound distinct. Anytime 2 layers overlap in pitch, in other words, anytime they have no clear distinction between which voice is higher than the other, they're going to sound more connected to each other to the listener than any layers that remain distinctly separate. So here, let's try raising the melody up an octave to give it a little more separation from the accompaniment. Separating layers by articulation means that you use different articulation types to give your layers different personalities. One example is to have a long, sustained, and legato melody played over a shorter, more staccato accompaniment. Let's try mimicking this example by making our accompaniment more staccato. Separating layers by rhythm is as simple as just using different rhythms for each layer. The simplest example being a well-written melody played over just simple sustained chords. However, you can get as intricate with this idea as you'd like. As long as 2 layers use distinct rhythmic motifs, they will be separated by rhythmic differentiation. This is already taken care of in our example. Finally, separating layers by tone color is just as simple as making sure your background and your foreground are using different tone colors or sound types. This can be as simple as splitting which orchestral sections are playing each layer, or as intricate as using various playing techniques to create more separation between 2 closely related instruments. For example, the violin 1 performing the melody, while violin 2 performs the accompaniment sul tasto, or bowing closer to the fingerboard, which gives a much different sound. Instead of working with all strings, let's try moving our melody to a solo trumpet and give the whole thing a re-listen. There we go, significantly better. Another strategy you can use is to separate the different layers with distinct dynamic levels. However, this carries many risks regarding the balance of your music and shouldn't be used without careful consideration. Now, there is no rule saying that you need to use each of these strategies at the same time. Instead, the general idea here is that the more strategies you apply to separate 2 layers, the more distinct they will sound from each other. The more strategies you use to relate two layers together, the more unified they are going to sound. As a general rule of thumb, striving to use at least 3 of the 4 strategies at any given point will help create more than enough separation between different layers of your music, while still providing some wiggle room to help relate them all together. Now, after separation, the next pillar is focus. While separation helps you divide your music into layers of foreground and background material, focus is the simple concept that at any given point, your audience's attention should be focused on the foreground of your music and not on the background. Focus is what gives your music structure and makes it comprehensible. It guides your audience through your music by showing them what material is the most important to pay attention to, and so they can listen to it repeat, develop, and grow. A lack of focus is one of the biggest reasons why music can come off as forgettable. Without proper focus on the foreground, there is often just too much information and too little structure in your music to have the kind of impact on your audience that you would like it to, which again results in a muddy and uninteresting sound. For example, let's listen to another arrangement. Oof, okay, so how can we go about improving this? As an orchestrator and composer, you have 3 powerful tools at your disposal to help maintain focus on your foreground material. You have change, activity, and pitch. Change is by far your strongest tool. The human ear is drawn to novel material. Something as simple as just adding a new instrument or breaking from an established pattern can help bring attention to your foreground. On the same note, highly repetitive motifs or ideas tend to quickly fall into the background and lose focus. In essence, a melody that includes more rhythmic and pitch variation than its accompanimental material, which tends to happen by default in most cases, will have an easier time maintaining focus than an overly simple, unchanging, and repetitive rhythmic idea. Notice how if we just introduce the ostinato a little earlier than the melody, the arrangement immediately becomes a bit clearer. Now, activity is a close second to change and explains why we initially had difficulty with the ostinato and melody. The idea here is that fast and rhythmically active ideas demand more attention than slower and sustained ones. This tends to be the biggest offender when it comes to music that lacks proper focus. It's a common mistake for an orchestrator to introduce a slow and sustained melody and then repeat it with a much quicker and rhythmically interesting ostinato underneath it. If the goal is to have your audience start focusing on the ostinato more than the melody, then fantastic. Otherwise, this is a great strategy for losing focus. Fortunately, the idea of changing material is much more powerful than activity, which is why many styles of music make great use of highly active and repetitive ostinati paired with a slower but more interesting melodic idea. As long as the ostinato is introduced before the melody, it should have enough time to have its repetitive nature drop it into the background before the melody comes in to command the foreground. Finally, pitch is the third tool at your disposal here. All else being equal, a higher pitch will demand more attention from the listener than a lower pitch. These 3 tools tend to be fairly intuitive to most composers and orchestrators, but when planning out a new arrangement, you should still take the time to figure out how you can use these 3 tools to maintain proper focus in your music, and strategically place each layer of your sketch in the foreground or background. Finally, the third pillar we'll discuss in this video is balance. The basic premise here is that each layer of your music should have comparable power. Many beginner orchestrators will make the mistake of believing their background material needs to be quieter than their foreground, which results in uneven and somewhat clunky sounding arrangements. As long as proper separation and focus have been achieved, there's no real reason why any given layer of your music should be more powerful than the others. Balance is what makes your music sound natural. If your melody is arranged to be big and commanding, then it needs an accompaniment that can match it. Unfortunately, balance is the most abstract and subjective of the 3 pillars, yet it is no less important. The best strategy I have been able to find for securing proper balance is to think of your arrangements as having one of three different sizes: large, medium, and small. By size, I don't necessarily mean the number of instruments. Instead, it's much more accurate to think of the overall power and presence of the instruments. For example, in the right setting, a small group of trumpets and trombones could be considered just as large as a full string section of 40 plus players. The idea behind this strategy is to start with your foreground. What size orchestration do you plan to use it for? Once you figure that out, it's a simple matter of making sure each layer of your background uses a comparable size and orchestration. The one exception to this rule is that as long as your melody, bass line, and primary accompanimental layer have the same size, then all other accompanimental layers like ear candy and embellishments can have a smaller size if needed. And with that, we have reached the end of another video. I want to take a quick moment to thank my wonderful patrons who make videos like this one possible. This week, a special shout out goes out to my newest patrons, Thomas, Brett, and Nicholas. I'm grateful to have you on the team. I also want to thank each and every one of you who show your support through the many kind emails, messages, and comments that I receive. They really mean the world to me. If you'd like to show your support for the channel, there are links in the description of the video below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. So until next time, keep studying, keep working hard, and keep writing new music.